The recon ships returned from the ruins of the colony with heavy hearts. They carried images of the black ships, images that burned into the eyes of everyone who saw them. The Draxian dominion was no rumor anymore. They were real, they were close, and they had already spilled human blood. On Earth, the War Council gathered again in the vast chamber beneath the surface of the planet. The air was heavy, the silence broken only by the quiet hum of projectors showing the alien fleet drifting through human wreckage. No one could deny the truth anymore. The Draxians had declared war without words. A senior commander stood, his voice shaking but strong. He spoke of the Draxians' history. He told of how they had enslaved whole species, how they burned planets to ash when people resisted them, how even ancient powers avoided their wrath. "We are facing an empire that has ruled for centuries," he warned. "They do not see us as equals. To them, we are only prey." His words sank deep into the minds of everyone present. But then another voice rose, calm but filled with quiet fire. It was Admiral Rian Torin, a man who had fought in countless battles along the edge of human space. He stared at the images of the alien ships and spoke slowly. "Yes, they are powerful. Yes, they are cruel. But they have made a mistake. They think humanity is weak. They think we will kneel. They have no idea what waits for them if we choose to rise." The council listened. Some feared his words, but others felt a spark of hope, or maybe rage, growing inside them. Across Earth, whispers spread. The people demanded answers. Families who lost loved ones to the destroyed colony filled the streets with candles, mourning and calling for justice. Soldiers sharpened their blades and prepared their rifles. Everywhere, the name of the Draxians became a curse spoken through clenched teeth. In secret, the military prepared to reveal what had been hidden for decades. The project was vast, the greatest secret in human history. But before it could be unleashed, the leaders needed to decide. Would they stand and fight, or would they bow their heads and pray for mercy? Reports came in from deep space. Draxian ships had been seen near other human colonies. Some had already vanished, just like the first. Each report cut deeper into the hearts of humanity. The pattern was clear. The Dominion would not stop until Earth itself lay in ruins. Finally, the leaders reached their choice. They would not beg. They would not hide. They would fight. Admiral Torin stood before the council, his voice cold and sharp as steel. "We have been patient for too long. The galaxy thinks we are children, too young to wield true power. The Draxians believe they can strike us without consequence. It is time to prove them wrong. It is time to show them what humanity can become when cornered." His words carried like thunder, and no one dared to argue. Preparations began. Fleets were quietly mobilized. Factories hidden under oceans and inside hollowed moons came alive, machines roaring as they built ships, weapons, and armor. Entire populations were called to service, engineers, scientists, and pilots working day and night. But outside the high walls of secrecy, the people of Earth were left with silence. They only knew that war was coming, and that their leaders had made their choice. Far away, in the dark reaches of space, the Draxians watched. In their great council chambers, the alien warlords laughed at humanity's pain. They mocked the cries of the survivors, mocked the weak fleets humanity had shown in the past. To them, humans were nothing more than a minor nuisance, a stubborn race that would be crushed like all the others. "They will kneel," one warlord said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Or they will burn. Either way, they will not last long." But even as they laughed, their scouts sent warnings. They reported strange movements in human space. Shipyards glowing with light, fleets gathering, factories roaring to life. The Draxian commanders dismissed these reports. They could not imagine humanity building something large enough to matter. They could not imagine the storm that was about to be unleashed. On Earth, Admiral Torin looked at the fleet list. His eyes traced the numbers, row after row of ships, each one ready, each one built in secret for this very day. He remembered the colony, the silence, the screams. He swore that silence would be answered with fire. "The enemy thinks we are weak," he whispered to himself. "Let them keep thinking that. When the time comes, they will learn fear." And so the stage was set. The Draxians, cruel and arrogant, believed they had already won. Humanity, wounded and furious, prepared to rise with a power no one expected. The galaxy did not know it yet, but the balance of power was about to change. The night was coming, but behind that night, humanity's fire burned brighter than ever. Deep beneath the oceans, inside hollow moons, and across hidden stations in the asteroid belt, the greatest secret in human history came alive. For decades, Earth had worked in silence, preparing for a war that most hoped would never come. It was called Project Retribution, a plan whispered about in dark corridors, dismissed by many as rumor, but now it was real. The Draxian attack had awakened it. Massive doors opened under the seas, releasing steel titans that rose through the water and broke into the skies. Moons long thought empty rumbled as hidden hangars opened, pouring out ships like swarms of hornets. From shipyards camouflaged in asteroid shadows, carriers, battleships, and destroyers came to life, their engines glowing bright blue against the void. Humanity had built not hundreds, not thousands, but hundreds of thousands of warships. 700,000 in total. The fleet was beyond anything the galaxy believed possible. Earth had been silent, ignored, considered weak, and that silence had been used to build a weapon of vengeance. When the first wave of ships launched, citizens of Earth looked to the skies. The night turned into fire as engines lit up the heavens. Families stood on rooftops, watching as the black shadows of warships cut across the stars. Soldiers inside those ships stood at attention, hearts burning with the memory of the destroyed colony. Some whispered prayers, others whispered promises. All of them swore the same oath: humanity would not kneel. In the War Council chamber, Admiral Rian Torin watched the launch feeds. His face was hard, his jaw set, his eyes locked on the endless rows of ships forming in orbit. Around him, generals and leaders stood in silence. None of them spoke, because words were too small for what they were seeing. The screen showed the fleet spreading across the solar system, like a storm of steel ready to break free. Finally, Torin spoke, his voice low but strong. "The Draxians thought they struck fear into us. They were wrong. They have awakened something greater than fear. They have awakened humanity's fury. Today, we stop being prey. Today, the hunters will learn fear." His words echoed across the chamber, across the transmissions sent to every commander, and across the fleets themselves. Pilots heard them, engineers heard them, soldiers heard them, and all felt the same fire in their veins. Across the galaxy, spies and scouts tried to report what they were seeing. They watched in disbelief as hundreds of thousands of ships took formation, as the silence of humanity shattered in thunder. Some reports reached the Draxian Dominion. Warlords laughed at them, refusing to believe. 700,000 ships, they scoffed. Humans barely have fleets worth counting. They must be inflating their numbers. Others, wiser, felt a chill. They had seen strange movements, they had heard rumors of Earth's hidden industries, and now, deep inside, they wondered if the reports were true. But arrogance won the debate. The Draxians had crushed countless enemies before. They would crush humans too. Back in the solar system, the fleet gathered near Saturn, an endless formation stretching farther than the eye could see. Carriers the size of cities floated like giants, surrounded by destroyers and escorts. Battleships bristling with weapons gleamed under the sunlight. Fighters swarmed like insects, darting between larger ships, testing their wings. 700,000 ships, unified under one command, one purpose, one hunger for vengeance. Admiral Torin stood at the center of the command deck aboard the flagship Vanguard. The ship was the largest ever built by human hands, a fortress in space, armed with weapons powerful enough to break planets. Its bridge crew waited for his order. He looked around, saw their faces, saw the fear mixed with courage, and gave a single nod. "Transmit to the fleet." The officer complied, and Torin's voice spread across all channels. "Men and women of Earth, children of humanity, today you stand as the wall that no enemy shall cross. The Draxians think we are weak. They think we are fragile. They think they can kill us without consequence. They are wrong. Look around you. 700,000 ships stand ready. 700,000 hearts beat with the same fire. We do not fight for glory. We do not fight for conquest. We fight for the colony that was lost, for the families who scream in silence, for every child who looks to the stars and dreams of a future free from fear. Today we rise. Today humanity claims its place among the stars. The speech ended, and the fleet roared with voices, with claps, with hearts pounding in unison. Across every ship, soldiers prepared for war. Engines ignited, weapons charged, shields activated. The storm was ready to move. Yet, beyond the fire and pride, there was silence in space. The enemy had not yet seen what was coming. The Draxians laughed in their arrogance, mocking humanity even as the greatest armada ever built prepared to strike. But soon, very soon, the laughter would die. Humanity's fury was awake, and nothing could stop it now. The fleet moved like a storm through the void, hundreds of thousands of ships gliding in perfect formation, engines burning like stars. Their destination was a Draxian outpost on the edge of human space, a stronghold built to watch over conquered worlds and prepare for new invasions. The Draxians never imagined that humans would dare to strike them here. In their arrogance, they believed humanity would cower, would hide behind fragile walls, begging for mercy. They were wrong. Aboard the flagship Vanguard, Admiral Rian Torin stood at the command deck, his gaze locked on the holographic display of the enemy station. Around him, officers moved with precise focus, their voices calm but firm as they reported fleet positions. The order had not yet been given, but every soldier aboard every ship could feel the weight of the moment. This was the first strike. This was where humanity would draw blood. On the Draxian outpost, guards watched their screens lazily, laughing and mocking as they saw the first signals of human ships. They thought it was a small scouting force, perhaps a desperate attack by a handful of ships seeking revenge. Pathetic, one Draxian sneered, his sharp teeth flashing as he laughed. Humans send scraps against us. But as more signals appeared, their laughter began to fade. More and more ships flooded the sensors until the display was covered in red marks. Thousands. Tens of thousands. Hundreds of thousands. The Draxians froze, unable to believe their eyes. Humanity had arrived not with scraps but with a storm. "This is impossible," a Draxian commander shouted, but the truth was undeniable. Humanity had hidden its power, and now that power was here. On the Vanguard, Torin gave the command. "All ships, weapons free. Today, we take our first blood." The order rippled across the fleet, and a moment later, the void lit up with fire. Beams of energy, missiles, and kinetic rounds streaked through space, cutting across the darkness and slamming into the Draxian defenses. The outpost shields flared brightly, straining under the assault, but the sheer number of human warships was overwhelming. The first wave of Draxian ships scrambled to meet the attack, sleek black vessels moving with deadly grace, but they were met by swarms of human fighters that tore into them like wolves. Explosions blossomed in the dark, one after another, as the mighty Dominion ships were torn apart by the furious strike. Inside the outpost, alarms screamed. Draxian soldiers ran through the halls, shouting orders, trying to organize a defense. But panic was spreading. They had never seen an enemy come at them with such numbers, such precision, such fury. For centuries, they had been the predators. Now, for the first time, they felt like prey. Aboard a human destroyer, young pilot Eric Jansen gripped his controls, his hands shaking but steady. He guided his fighter squadron through waves of enemy ships, his eyes burning with the memory of his family who had lived on the destroyed colony. Each shot he fired, each enemy ship that burned, felt like a voice of the dead rising in vengeance. Across the fleet, soldiers felt the same fire. They were no longer fighting just for orders. They were fighting for every soul lost to the Dominion. The battle raged on, human warships moving like a single machine, coordinated, relentless. The Draxians fought hard, their weapons brutal and their tactics ruthless, but they were not prepared for the sheer scale of humanity's wrath. For every human ship destroyed, 10 more pressed forward. For every Draxian fighter that struck, a swarm of human guns answered. Hours passed, the void filled with wreckage, with fire, with the broken remains of once proud Draxian vessels. The outpost shields finally failed, cracking under the endless barrage. Tauren gave the final order. Finish it. Human warships unleashed their full fury. Massive cannons roared, missiles rained down, and beams of energy sliced through the station's core. The Draxian outpost, once a symbol of their power, exploded in a brilliant fireball, fragments scattering into the void. Silence followed, broken only by the cheers of human crews across the fleet. For the first time, the Dominion had been struck down. Humanity had drawn blood. On the vanguard, Admiral Tauren stood quietly, his eyes still on the wreckage. He did not cheer. He did not smile. He only whispered, "This is just the beginning." In the Dominion's council chambers far away, the news arrived like a blade through the heart. The Draxian warlords, who had mocked humanity, stared in silence at the reports. Their outpost was gone. Their fleet was shattered. Thousands of their soldiers were dead. For the first time in centuries, fear crept into their hearts. The humans were not weak. The humans were not prey. They were something new, something dangerous, something unstoppable. And they had only just begun. The destruction of the Draxian outpost was only the beginning. The news spread across the galaxy like fire in dry grass. Species who had once laughed at humanity now whispered in fear, wondering how such a young race could destroy a Dominion stronghold in a single strike. The Draxians themselves were shaken, but their pride refused to accept defeat. They sent message after message declaring the humans would be crushed, that the Dominion would erase them as they had erased countless others. But behind their words was fear, and fear turned into rage. The Draxian High Command gathered their fleets, vast armadas built over centuries of conquest. They moved them toward human space, determined to make an example of Earth. Yet humanity was no longer waiting. The fleet of 700,000 warships did not retreat to defend. It advanced. Battle after battle erupted across the stars. Human fleets struck deep into Draxian territory, targeting shipyards, supply lines, and command stations. Every move was planned with precision, every strike designed to weaken the Dominion's grip. The Draxians responded with fury, sending wave after wave of their best ships, but time after time they were met with fire. Humanity's tactics were sharp, their soldiers fearless, their technology pushed beyond limits by desperation and rage. On the front line, stories were born that would be told for generations. A squadron of human fighters took on triple their number and won, their leader refusing to retreat even as his ship burned. A destroyer, engines failing, rammed into a Draxian battleship, splitting it apart in a blaze of fire. Soldiers on ground campaigns fought with grit and fury, holding the line against overwhelming numbers until reinforcements arrived. Each battle left scars, but each battle also brought victory. Humanity was not just fighting for survival. They were fighting for revenge, for pride, for every life stolen by the Dominion. Admiral Rian Tauren commanded from the flagship Vanguard, his voice a constant presence across the fleet. He reminded his soldiers why they fought, why they could not falter. "Remember the colony," he said before one battle. "Remember the silence of our dead. Let their silence be answered with fire." And the soldiers answered. They answered with courage, with fury, with relentless determination. The Draxians soon realized this was not the war they expected. They had crushed species before, but none had fought like the humans. Others had begged for mercy. Others had fled into hiding. The humans did neither. They attacked again and again, like fire that refused to die. The galaxy watched in shock as the Dominion's mighty fleets crumbled piece by piece. For centuries, the Draxians had ruled without question, their power unchallenged. Now, a race once considered weak was dragging them into a war they could not easily win. Still, the price was heavy. Human ships were lost in great numbers, soldiers gave their lives on distant worlds, and families back on Earth mourned with every new list of the dead. But instead of breaking their spirit, the losses only hardened it. Each death added to the fire of vengeance. Each destroyed ship fueled the determination to fight harder. Humanity was bleeding, but it refused to fall. On one battlefield near a dying star, the largest clash of the war erupted. Thousands of ships on both sides collided in a storm of fire and metal. The star's light dimmed as wreckage filled its orbit, and the void shook with the thunder of weapons. Torren's fleet held the line, maneuvering with perfect unity, each ship covering the other, each pilot fighting as if the fate of Earth rested on their shoulders. Hours of brutal combat ended with the Draxians retreating, leaving behind burning ships and shattered pride. Humanity had stood against the best the Dominion could offer, and it had not broken. Across the galaxy, whispers grew louder. Other species, long enslaved by the Draxians, began to see hope. If humans could stand, if humans could fight, then maybe the Dominion was not unstoppable after all. The Great War was no longer only humanity's war. It was becoming something larger, a storm that threatened to tear down the empire of the Draxians and reshape the galaxy forever. And as Admiral Torren stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, staring out at the field of wreckage, he knew the war was far from over. The Draxians would not surrender easily. They would come back stronger, more desperate, more dangerous. The worst battles were still ahead. Yet his voice carried steady as he spoke to his fleet. This is only the beginning. They thought we would kneel. Instead, we rise. And we will not stop until the Dominion is broken, until every world they burned is avenged. The fleet answered with silence, but it was the silence of steel, the silence of determination, the silence before the storm. The Great War had begun, and humanity would see it through to the end. The Great War burned across the stars, battle after battle fought with fire and steel, but even as humanity pushed forward, the Dominion began to reveal the true weight of its empire. The Draxians had ruled for centuries, and their resources seemed endless. For every fleet humanity destroyed, another rose from the darkness. For every victory celebrated, a new wave of warships pressed into human space. Entire sectors of the galaxy trembled as the Dominion gathered its strength. Reports flooded into Earth Command, worlds under siege, colonies threatened, human fleets stretched thin against overwhelming numbers. Even with 700,000 ships, humanity was facing an empire that spanned hundreds of systems. For the first time since the war began, doubt crept into the hearts of soldiers and citizens. Could even this mighty fleet endure the endless tide of Draxian power? Admiral Rian Torren felt the weight heavier than anyone. On the bridge of the Vanguard, he stood over maps filled with red markers, each one a Draxian fleet moving closer, closer, closer. He knew his soldiers were brave. He knew their ships were strong. But he also knew numbers mattered, and the Dominion had more. Around him, his officers whispered concerns. If this continues, they will grind us down. We cannot fight forever. But Torren remained silent, his mind turning not to despair but to the secret that had remained hidden, even from most of his commanders. Humanity had built ships in secret. Humanity had built fleets in silence. But humanity had also built something else. Something far greater. Something too terrible to use unless the moment demanded it. And that moment had come. In the shadows of Earth's outer colonies, hidden in deep caverns and under artificial mountains, the superweapons of Project Retribution waited. They were not ships. They were cannons the size of cities, mounted on platforms that could fold through space and appear in distant systems. They were designed to do more than destroy fleets. They were designed to crack planets, to burn worlds to ash. For decades they had been hidden, locked away because no one dared unleash such power. But the Dominion's tide was rising, and the choice was clear: unleash the weapons or watch humanity fall. The first test came at the Battle of Vera's Gate, a choke point system where 3 Dominion fleets converged to trap the human armada. The Draxians outnumbered Torren's forces 3-1, their ships closing in from all sides. 4 hours, humanity fought desperately, holding the line, but the wall was breaking. Draxian fire tore through human ranks, ships exploded in brilliant flashes, and for the first time, retreat seemed inevitable. On the bridge of the Vanguard, officers shouted, alarms screamed, and the crew braced for death. Then Torren gave the order. Activate the retribution cannon. The words fell heavy, and even his own crew froze. They had heard rumors but never believed. Now the truth stood before them. A ripple of light cut across space as a massive structure unfolded beyond the fleet, its shape jagged and monstrous, its core glowing brighter than any star. The Draxians paused, their advance faltering as they scanned the new arrival. They did not understand what it was. But they would. The weapon charged, its glow growing, its power humming through the void. Then, with a soundless scream, it fired. A beam of white energy tore through space, striking the center of the Dominion fleet. In an instant, dozens of ships disintegrated, their armor melting, their cores imploding. The beam did not stop. It cut across the battlefield like a blade of fire, tearing apart hundreds of ships in seconds. Even the mighty Draxian battleships crumbled under its fury. Silence followed, broken only by the stunned gasps of humanity's soldiers and the terrified shrieks of the Dominion. For the first time in living memory, a Draxian fleet had not just been defeated. It had been annihilated. The Dominion retreated in chaos, their ships fleeing, their commanders shouting in disbelief. On the vanguard, the crew stared at the weapon's fading glow. They had seen death before, but never like this. Some whispered in awe, others in fear. What had they unleashed? Admiral Torren's face was carved in stone. He knew what this meant. The tide had turned. Humanity had shown not just strength but a power that rivaled gods. Yet he also knew the cost. Such weapons were dangerous, not only to enemies but to humanity's own soul. Still, the choice had been made. Humanity would do whatever it took to survive. Across the galaxy, the shock spread. Worlds under Dominion rule trembled. Species enslaved for generations whispered of rebellion. And in the Dominion's Grand Council chamber, warlords argued with fear in their eyes. They destroyed a fleet with a single weapon, one shouted. They cracked our power like glass. But others hissed with fury, demanding retaliation. If we bow to them now, the Empire will collapse. We must destroy them completely, no matter the cost. And so, the war only grew darker. The Draxians prepared to gather their full might, to throw everything they had against humanity. But they no longer faced a fragile race hiding in shadows. They faced a force that had unleashed the fire of vengeance, a force that would not stop until justice was complete. The turning point had come. The galaxy would never be the same again. The colony was alive only days ago. Families lived in bright cities under silver domes, children ran through parks filled with glowing plants, and trade ships moved between orbiting stations. But now the colony was silent. When Earth Command tried to call, no voice answered. Signals were gone. At first, people thought it was a system failure, maybe a broken relay. But then the last transmission appeared. It was short, broken, and filled with fear. A man's voice screamed for help. Explosions shook in the background, alarms howled, and then silence came. That silence was more terrifying than the screams. Something had destroyed the colony, and no one had survived to explain what it was. In the control room on Earth, commanders watched the message over and over. Each time it ended, they stared at one another, wondering what kind of enemy could erase a whole world. The silence stretched heavy, like the weight of the dead pressing down on them. A young officer whispered, "What if they come here next?" No one answered him, but all of them thought the same thing. They all remembered that humanity was not the strongest race in the stars. Other species called humans weak, young, and fragile. They had been ignored in galactic politics, dismissed as newcomers who did not understand true power. But now, someone had tested that weakness. Someone had chosen to strike. Recon ships were sent to the colony ruins. They moved carefully through the dark remains of what had once been a proud home of humanity. The cities were shattered, burned down to ash. Orbiting stations had been torn apart, left as twisted metal. The ground below was scarred with craters, black smoke still rising into the thin air. No survivors. Not even bodies. Everything had been taken or destroyed. In the distance, the recon crew saw movement. Alien ships drifted through the wreckage, collecting pieces, scanning, as if they were proud of what they had done. The recon captain froze. He recognized the design of the ships. Their black armor, their sharp wings, their glowing red engines. The Draxian Dominion. A race feared across the galaxy for their cruelty. They had ruled star systems with iron fists for centuries. Many had fallen before their fleets, and now humanity had been chosen as their new target. The captain sent back the images. On Earth, leaders and military officers gathered in the War Council chamber. The pictures of the alien ships were displayed on a massive screen. The room filled with angry voices, questions, and fear. Some demanded immediate war. Others warned that fighting the Draxians was suicide. They destroyed our colony like crushing an insect, one general said. If we strike, they will destroy us too. But another officer, a young woman with fire in her eyes, slammed her fist against the table. If we do nothing, they will come for Earth next. They will take our children, burn our homes, and leave us with nothing. Do you want to wait for that? The room fell silent. She was right. The Draxians had tasted blood. They would not stop. Earth's leaders stared at each other, knowing a choice had to be made. The silence after her words was louder than the chaos before. In that silence, the fear turned into something else. Rage. Across Earth, the news spread quickly. Families who had loved ones in the colony wept and demanded justice. Soldiers asked to join the fight. Scientists whispered of secret projects built in shadows, weapons designed not for defense but for vengeance. The people no longer cared about being seen as weak. Humanity had been attacked, and humanity would answer. Yet no one outside the council chamber knew what kind of answer was being prepared. For decades, Earth had hidden something. A massive plan, too large and too dangerous to reveal until the right time came. That time was now. But for the people watching the stars, only questions remained. Who would lead the fight? How could humans stand against an empire as powerful as the Draxians? And above all, how much blood would need to be spilled before vengeance was complete? In the dark of space, the ruined colony drifted silently. Its broken pieces turned slowly, reflecting the cold light of a distant sun. Among the wreckage, alien ships continued their work, tearing apart the last traces of human life, not knowing that every action, every moment of cruelty, was being watched. And on Earth, hearts burned. Not with fear anymore, but with something far more dangerous. Humanity had been wounded. Humanity had been mocked. But now, humanity was ready to rise. The galaxy shook as the war reached its final stage. The Dominion had gathered its full strength, every fleet, every soldier, every weapon they could command. They hurled their power at humanity, desperate to crush the race that had defied them, desperate to erase the shame of defeat. Battles burned across systems, stars lit with fire, planets scarred with destruction. Humanity fought with all it had, the 700,000 warships moving like a storm of vengeance. Yet even as the Draxians raged, the truth became clear, the tide had turned, and it could not be undone. Humanity was no longer the weak race the galaxy once dismissed. It was an iron force, relentless, united by pain, and driven by rage. On the flagship Vanguard, Admiral Rian Torin stood over the final war map. The Draxian homeworld lay ahead, the heart of their empire, the throne from which they had ruled for centuries with cruelty and fire. Around him, his officers waited, their faces pale but determined. Everyone knew what this meant. The Dominion had begged no peace, offered no surrender. They would fight until one side was erased. And humanity had chosen that it would not be them. The order was given. The fleets advanced. Across the void, the Draxian defenses bristled, an ocean of black warships waiting to meet the storm. Their warlords stood in command towers, their voices filled with arrogance even as fear gnawed at them. The humans are fire, one growled, but fire burns out. We will drown them in our endless night. But when the battle began, the endless night broke apart. Human fleets struck with precision and fury, carving through the Dominion's walls of steel. The sky above the Draxian homeworld turned into chaos, filled with burning wreckage and flashes of fire. The Retribution cannons roared, beams tearing through fleets and breaking apart ships once thought invincible. The Dominion fought harder than ever, their ships swarming, their soldiers throwing themselves into the fight with desperate fury. But the humans did not falter. For every loss, they pushed harder. For every scar, they answered with fire. Hours passed, and the great battle consumed the heavens. The Draxian homeworld trembled under the shock of explosions echoing through its skies. Finally, Admiral Torren gave the command that would decide the war. Unleash full firepower. Let this world remember our dead. The Retribution cannons aligned, their cores glowing with white-hot energy. The beams fired, crashing into the Draxian defenses, tearing through shields, ripping apart planetary fortresses. Cities below shook, towers crumbling as the very ground split under the bombardment. The Dominion screamed in rage and terror. For centuries, they had ruled without question. Now they saw their empire burning. Some warlords tried to flee, their ships racing into the void, but humanity's fleets hunted them down. Others fought to the last breath, their voices cursing even as fire consumed them. But in the end, all of them fell. The homeworld itself cracked under the assault, its skies black with smoke, its seas boiling with heat, its once proud towers broken into ash. Humanity stood victorious. On the vanguard, silence filled the bridge. The crew stared at the burning planet below, their faces lit by the glow of destruction. Some wept, others cheered, but all of them knew the truth: the war was over. The Dominion was broken. The galaxy had changed forever. Admiral Torren's voice rose above the silence, steady and cold. This war began with their cruelty. It ends with our revenge. Let every star remember this day. Humanity bows to no one. His words spread across the fleet, and soldiers roared with pride, their voices echoing through the channels, a single cry of triumph that carried across the stars. Across the galaxy, enslaved worlds watched the fall of the Dominion with wide eyes. Chains that had bound them for centuries felt lighter. Hope returned to species who had forgotten what freedom was. And all of them whispered the same name: humanity. The young race, once mocked, had destroyed the greatest empire the galaxy had ever known. Back on Earth, people filled the streets with tears and fire, mourning their dead and celebrating their victory. Families who had lost loved ones held their names high, knowing their sacrifice had built a future free from fear. Children looked to the skies, not with dread, but with wonder, dreaming of stars that now belonged to them. But Admiral Torren did not dream. He stood alone in his chamber, staring at the endless night outside. Victory was theirs, yes, but he knew the galaxy had changed in ways no one could yet understand. Humanity was no longer a small voice. It was a storm. It was power. And power would bring new challenges. Still, he whispered one final promise to the silent colony that had started it all. You are avenged. We will never forget. The war was over, but the story of humanity was only beginning.